things that we don't feel good about, things we've said, things we've done, and things we need to apologize for. But for these things, Lord, we confess them and are grateful for your mercy and your forgiveness. Help us, Lord, to live lives that honor you, that build up the people around us. Help us, Lord, to have a heart that's bent towards you and toward others. It's so difficult in the culture we live in because we're all constantly pressed to be something, be someone, be somebody we're not, and match up to somebody else. Lord, we just want to match up to you. We want our lives to be an honor to you. I just ask that by your Spirit, you grant us the strength, the focus, the clarity in our heart and mind, that our lives each day would truly be yours, and that you be honored in them. And we just ask today, Lord, that you would grant us open hearts to your word, help us to hear, to understand, help me to speak clearly. Lord, fill my mouth with your words for all of us, and that I might learn as well in the time we spend together. I give you thanks in Jesus. Amen. All right. Well, we're in Proverbs chapter 26 today. This is plowing slowly through the Proverbs here over the year, but today in chapter 26 we find a focus on three things: the foolish, the lazy, and the deceitful. These are all of these behaviors have been addressed almost in every chapter by one or two parables along the way, but this is one of the first chapters in which we've had a collection of these three themes, particularly. And so I wanted to walk us through these today, and hoping that they'll be helpful to us to see some definition as to what is foolishness, how do you recognize it, what is laziness, how do you recognize that, and what is deceit, and how can you be perceptive of it and know when that's what you're getting. So these parables address these kind of things, and they're addressing what is actually opposite of what God values. Foolishness, laziness, deceit, and what God values is wisdom, responsibility, and honesty. I chose the passage that you read this morning from Ephesians with the thought in mind that Paul, when he was writing to the Ephesians, must have been reading chapter 26 in Proverbs before he wrote it, because all of his instruction through that passes through the same kinds of things that we find in this chapter. I like Paul more and more as we're going through Proverbs, because I find him quoting Proverbs all over the place. And if not quoting them, he's teaching the principles that we've been reading about in the Proverbs. So, well, reflecting, I think, on these Proverbs and considering our own behavior in life may result in some helpful changes for each of us. It may help us in our relationship with people who might be identified in one of these categories of characteristics. So let's look at the chapter here. One thing I wanted to point out to you, that is verses 1 through 12 address the fool. Verses 13 through 16 address the sluggard, the lazy person. And verses 17 through 28 are descriptions of deceitful speech, mostly, but there are a few thoughts in there regarding meddling in things that are not yours, quarreling or feeding quarrels, and gossip. Those surface as well during those verses, but primarily it's about deceit. So, anyway, in verse 1, like snow in summer or rain in harvest, honor is not fitting for a fool. And the point is, don't elevate, give place of recognition to one who is foolish in how they live their life and how they speak. how they relate. They're just foolish in their life. Don't honor them for that. It is so out of place. This is the point of the proverb, that honoring a fool is so out of place. It's like snow coming in the summer and rain coming during the harvest. And that would be particularly meaningful to people in the Middle East, particularly in Israel, because in Israel it doesn't snow in the summer, any place. Their highest mountain doesn't get snow in the summer. And it seldom rains in the fall during the harvest. And if the weather did produce snow in summer or rain during the harvest, both would have devastating effects in the country. And honoring the fool is compared to that. It's so out of place. Honoring a fool even could be destructive. One person, in reference to this, he brought another whole metaphor to the picture here. Honoring a fool makes as much sense as putting a desert nomad at the helm of an ocean sailing vessel. He's out of place. And so is honoring the fool. Verse 2, like a fluttering sparrow or a darting swallow, an undeserved curse does not come to rest. And I don't know if you've ever watched birds, and they just, particularly, I don't know much about a swallow, but I've certainly seen sparrows flying around. But I do remember up in Alaska seeing the swallow along the coastline of Cook Inlet, and they fly all over. They never land. I think the picture here for us is the fact that an undeserved curse floats and never lands. It has no value to it. It has no impact to it. And the context of this, of the fool, is foolish to curse somebody. An undeserved curse is like a bird's aimless motion without landing. The curse doesn't land or have any effect when it's undeserved. You can curse me for something I didn't do, and I don't know how to respond to that because I'm innocent, at least from my perspective. You understand? That's the point of the proverb that's here. A fool's curse is meaningless. Verse 3, a whip for the horse, a halter for the donkey, and a rod for the backs of fools. And the point, again, of this parable is that it's foolish behavior is only controlled by physical force, as you would handle a horse or handle a donkey or a stubborn mule, as probably in my context I would understand that better than the donkey. But a fool doesn't learn easily. I worked hard at trying to process people that I've known in life and people I know now. And there are some that fit the description of foolish here, but there aren't many people that I know that I could identify in this kind of category to even know how to respond to them or treat them, how to interact with them. You may know somebody like that, and instructions that comes here today helps us to know how to relate and how to deal, how to respond to a man who's foolish and cannot hear good instruction, could not hear what is true. And there are people like that in our world. Probably the only person I could think of was a conversation I had with a man who was living in the tents along the riverbed in Orange County, in a tent city of about 1,000 people living along the riverbed. And there was a man who just, I think he was on something. When I was riding my bike down the river trail there, he just stepped out in front of me. And when I tried to move around, he moved like this, so I stopped and had some dialogue with him. But he was, there's nothing of logic that took place in that conversation. He just didn't know what world he was coming from. But he was there by choice, not because he was homeless or didn't have work. He didn't want to work, and living out there and picking garbage cans, it was what he wanted to do with his life. I wasn't about to be forceful with him, but there was no controlling, that's for sure. Verse 4, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, and he will be wise in his own eyes. He will not learn. So the advice there in verses 4 and 5, they parallel each other. One, it almost sounds contradictory. It says, don't answer a fool, and then it says, answer a fool. But don't answer a fool within the context of what his debate is. Don't engage him in debate. That's the point. Or you'll end up looking like him, because his logic flow will not make any sense. There's no progress in conversation that can happen. But if you find that what a fool is saying and doing is harmful to others, or maybe even to himself, that's the time to confront. That's the time to answer him. That's the time to expose and correct his foolish behavior. And most of the time, you know, this felt a little strange to me, because I've lived my life with the sense that if something's going on in somebody's life that I think needs to be addressed, I best do that in private and not public. And over the years, I've adapted that principle to the thought, I will address it as to the degree that it is public. If it is a public thing, then it needs to be addressed publicly. But if the issue in the person's life is private, then I have that conversation with them privately. But here, the implication is to the fool who is doing hurtful things, address him publicly, that he might find embarrassment in that and want to address the issue. But the point is that a fool typically would not be responsive to you. So don't answer the fool. And if you do, hold him accountable. Leave him no defense for his behavior. Verse 6, like cutting off one's feet or drinking violence. I've never seen bottled violence before, so I'm not quite sure what that is, but cutting off one's feet or drinking violence is the sending of a message by the hand of a fool. His point here being is that the fool will not represent you well. Your message will likely be misunderstood and the result in the loss of your credibility with the person receiving the message, and potentially create harm for you by the message that is delivered. And so choose someone who's faithful, who is wise, to be your messenger, to represent you, or it could come back being your own feet are cut off. You're better off to walk with your own feet and deliver the message than have your feet cut off by a fool who delivers a message in error. So don't let a fool represent you, is the point there. Verse 7, like a lame man's legs that hang limp is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. A lame man's legs are useless. So a fool and his proverb are useless. He may speak something that sounds like wisdom, but has no logic to it. It's foolish. The fool's use of wisdom will be foolish. In verse 8, like tying a stone in a sling is the giving of honor to a fool. You got that picture? You know what a sling is. You know, there's a slingshot, you know, that you got that little leather pad with rubber strings and then the V for it, and you pull it back like this one, and you put something in the pocket of the sling, pull it back and let it go, and the force of the stretch of the rubber sends that object going flying. And you could hit something that could become food for you if you were really hungry, or you could just do target practice, I guess, or you could irritate somebody, but with a sling. But the picture that's here is you have a sling and you have a stone and you wrap it up in the sling part so it can't release. So you pull it back and it doesn't go anywhere. It just comes back at you. And so this is the picture that's given here. Like tying a stone in a sling is the giving of honor to a fool. Wrapping a stone in a sling so it won't release is nonsense. And it's potentially harmful to the thrower. So is honoring a fool nonsense. Don't feed his stupidity, his thoughtlessness. Don't honor it. Verse 9, like a thorn bush in a drunkard's hand is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Some of these proverbs I really had to work at in comprehending what is here. I was trying to think of a thorn bush. I'm not sure what that is, except it's a bush or a branch. It's got thorns on it. Like, we have roses on the back. Carla's got a huge rose garden. It's all the way across the back of our yard. And those rose bushes, the stems on those, have some really nasty thorns on them. But I can imagine having a branch with thorns in your hand, but in the hand of a drunkard, he can't feel the pain. He's drunk. He's tearing up his hand in these thorns, and he doesn't know it because he's drunk. And the comparison is drunk and hurting yourself is like a proverb in the mouth of a fool. He may have something of wisdom, but he doesn't know how to handle it, and he doesn't know what it means because he can't feel it. He doesn't have any sense for it. Like a drunk man doesn't have any sense for the thorn. A drunken man is not likely to feel the pain of the thorns, so a fool will not recognize the meaning of a proverb. He's not conscious of the wisdom in the proverb. A fool doesn't recognize wisdom. Verse 10, like an archer who wounds at random is he who hires a fool or any passerby. Okay, an archer who wounds at random, someone with a bow and arrow and is shooting at people, just randomly. He's a sniper on the corner, picking people off in the intersection. That's the picture of this archer who wounds at random. And that's compared to an employer, a man, a business owner, who hires a fool or any passerby who has no understanding. And I said, so a fool has no understanding or discernment, and sending him out as your employee or representative will likely result in problems wherever he goes. The wisdom in this proverb to an owner is hire somebody with some sense. Hire somebody that has the ability to process thought and comprehend wisdom, comprehend how to relate to other people. You don't want a fool who is not aware of the people around him nor of himself. Or you'll find that he'll go out there representing you and be creating wounds in the people he touches. Be thoughtful and hire wise, discerning people. Verse 11, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. I remember as a kid seeing a dog do that and almost wanting to throw up myself. The thought of the dog doing that just was so gross to me. But that gross image is portrayed here in verse 11. It says that's how a fool deals with his folly. He does something foolish and he just keeps doing it. He goes back to it and keeps doing it because he doesn't recognize the foolishness of his action. That's the fool. I thought it was interesting that Peter, in his second letter, quotes this proverb in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 22. 2:22. 2 Peter 2:22. That's the verse anyway. And he quotes this proverb to describe one who leaves a corrupt lifestyle only to return to it again. In 2 Peter, the picture there is a man who recognizes his error and he repents of that, and there's change in his life, and when things get difficult, he returns back to the life he had before, and he's twice as bad as he was before this time of renewal in his heart and life. And related that to a fool. I know some people like that in my life. I know some people who really dramatic changes in their life, having acknowledged faith and trust in God. Only down the road to find difficulty come their way, and came to the conclusion that God wasn't with them anymore, and returned to their former ways, and only worse. That's sad to see. Verse 12, do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There is no more hope for a fool. There is more hope for a fool than for him. That's the only positive statement made in these 12 verses about a fool. There's somebody worse than him. And the one who's worse than the fool is the one who's wise in his own eyes. The one who is conceited. Conceited arrogance is worse than a fool. And I don't think this statement is a statement of hope for the fool. It's just conceit's a difficult thing to assess in yourself. There's a fine line between confidence, being confident, having confidence, and being arrogant, conceited. It has everything to do with who or what is the object of your values. If God is the object of your values, your confidence is in Him. If the object of your value and faith is in yourself, conceit is the result. Which is that I get puffed up about how good I really am. And sometimes it's people believing their own fan club. Say, boy, you are this, you are that, you're the best, you're the greatest, and then you begin to believe that, and it's not long before you're better than you are in your head. It's good to walk in humility. It's good to see yourself as for who you could be, and know that what you are is by the grace of God, and in your walk and your trust in Him. So I said you want to guard your heart in that. This is the last, verse 12 is the last of the sequence addressing the fool here in this chapter. And at verse 13, Solomon turns his thoughts to the sluggard, or the lazy one. I'm not quite sure where the word sluggard, I've heard it used before, but it's not part of my vocabulary and things that I do. But a sluggard, I think of a slug, it's like a snail that kind of moves slangily across the ground. It's a slug. But laziness is the picture that's here to the sluggard. And as at verse 13 it says, the sluggard says, there is a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets. Proverbs 22, a few weeks back when we were there in chapter 22, it says the same thing. There's a lion in the street, but he adds the phrase, I'll be killed in the streets. And so the lazy man has got quite an imagination, and he says, I can't go out, I can't go to work today. There's a lion roaming out there. And so he's trying to convince other people around him that it's not safe to go out, so I can't go to work today. I can't do my work. But the picture is the one who's lazy can often be pretty creative in the excuses they give for doing nothing. Verse 14 again addresses the lazy, the sluggard. It says, as a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. I stretched my thinking just a little bit there, but somebody put it together for me. It says, like a door that moves on its hinges but goes nowhere. It swings, but it's not going anywhere. So is the sluggard who rolls over in his bed but doesn't get up. It's a lazy man. I might make a distinction here that there are times when someone who is certainly not lazy has a deep sense of responsibility and is just overwhelmed with all the work, the load that he has to carry, and he's tired and he's wasted. That is not a time to feel guilty about sleeping. What's a good time to say, hey, something's not right in my life, is when I, by pattern of life, sleep longer than I need to. And I don't get up and do things that need to be done, or that are responsibilities that are mine, or taking responsibility for my own life. That's the sluggard who is criticized in verse 14. Verse 15, the sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. And I want, the picture in my head is someone who plays with his food and never eats it. And I'm going, I know children that are like that. They can slop it all over their face and nothing gets in their mouth, but when they play it. But that's the picture that I see when I read. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. He plays with his food and doesn't eat. But the parallel is he plays at life but doesn't live responsibly. A counselor I once heard said this, the less you do, the less you want to do, until you are useless. Live an active life. Buy up the hours of the day that God has given you. Use the energy that's in your heart and your life, the dreams that are in your mind. Always be a learner. We've picked that up in a lot of the Proverbs as we've been reading along. Be one who's a learner. Understand what's going on around you. Understand the work, the process you're doing, so that you can teach somebody else. Or learn the process well and seek to understand and ask questions. So why do we do it this way? Why is this happening this way? Asking questions, always being a learner. In the process of learning, you'll gain understanding and discernment and wisdom. Don't waste the day and time of your life. Make it a time when you can grow and you can learn. Don't be the sluggard. Don't be the lazy one. The lazy sluggard will likely learn too late and be overcome by poverty and starvation. We've seen that in several Proverbs before as well. And I had a thought here. If anyone, you know anybody, or you find yourself tempted in these same ways to just be lazy about not being responsible, if you find yourself in this kind of condition or somebody else, it might be helpful to write down some specific things that you can do, that you need to do, that would be responsible on your part. Just list down a couple that you've not been doing because you've been lazy. Just write down a couple and determine to accomplish those couple things. Take small steps to move into a responsible life. And that can be helpful to you. But as you begin to see the benefit of being responsible, you'll be motivated internally to do the things that's responsible rather than the things that's lazy. get up at a specific time daily if getting up's an issue for you. Set the alarm and get out of bed. And then get about something that you've written down as a list of things to do. It also helps if you can go to bed at a given time as well. Now, having said all this, I'm probably the worst one to tell you this because I could stay up all night. The late hours are the most productive hours of my day. Nobody's calling. I'm not getting any texts. I don't get any marketing calls after 10 o'clock. But I also know that when I stay up late, it messes up my whole morning the next day. So you can check me on this in a few weeks down the road and say, Ed, how are you doing with your sleep? And that's another whole point, that if laziness is an issue to your life and you want to do something about it, find somebody to be a partner who will help hold you accountable. That's it's just helpful. How you do it with whatever the issue is that you're dealing with there. Verse 16. We're looking here. A sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who answer discreetly. Now, a lazy man is wiser in his own eyes. It's not that he's wiser, but in his own eyes he perceives himself to be smarter than 7 men who are wise. I've heard the ignorant are ignorant of their ignorance. The ignorant are ignorant of their ignorance. Those who don't know they don't know. Their arrogance, in their arrogance, they think themselves wiser than anybody else. And the thought in the New Testament came to mind with Romans chapter 1, verse 22, speaking of people who refuse to acknowledge God or give thanks. Professing to be wise, they become fools. It's Romans 1:22. It's at this point in the chapter that Solomon ends his description of the lazy, the sluggard, and begins to describing the results of a lying, deceitful tongue, thoughtless meddling, quarreling, gossiping. And so we're at verse 17 now. I'm going to walk you through these as well. Like one who seizes a dog by the ears is a passerby who meddles in a quarrel that's not his own. And I've had a dog yip at me, not bite me or attack me, but when I played with his ears and he didn't like it. I don't remember ever being that thoughtless about grabbing the dog by the ears and yanking on him. But there was a thought that came to my head, yank a dog's ears and get bit, interfere in another's quarrel and get hit. Just don't stick your nose in places that it doesn't belong, or you're apt to get the same results you get by yanking on a dog's ears. Be slow and thoughtful before involving yourself in a quarrel. And 18, like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows, is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. So I have to go backwards in this proverb. Is that a man who tells a lie or is deceitful with his neighbor is like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows. So a man who's speaking a lie and being deceitful, deceiving his neighbor, is as dangerous, destructive as a man shooting firebrands or arrows at people. Being deceitful to your neighbor is a destructive thing to do, and is not excused by a statement, I was only joking. when the deceit has happened, the harm has been done. That is not a joke. Foolish man could speak that. Leading the neighbor to believe something that's not true can create great harm to the neighbor and other people. Lies spread quickly and randomly hurt other people. The worst that can happen, maybe, is that you would lose the trust of your neighbor and the relationship with your neighbor. Saying that you were only kidding or joking will not undo the harm you created. So be careful with jesting. I have to be careful with that because I make fun for fun's sake, and I don't ever mean to be hurtful in that, but sometimes I'm not thoughtful about what I say and the sensitivity of something may be to somebody, and I'm just joking with it. So be careful with your jesting. Verse 20, without wood, a fire goes out. Ever been camping? Been down to the beach and have a beach fire down there? What happens when you quit putting wood on the fire? It becomes coals and embers, and then it's cold. If you want a fire, you have to keep putting wood on it. So the picture here is, without wood, a fire goes out. Without gossip, a quarrel dies down. So the behavior here that's addressed is, if you don't gossip, whatever the quarrel was, whatever the issue was, will dissipate, it will die. But if you keep gossiping about it, you spread to other people your opinion about something or your description of what happened, you just keep adding fuel to that fire. So if you want the quarrel to die down, stop feeding it. Stop putting wood on the fire. Spreading a rumor about someone or about a situation will often make a small matter a huge issue. Gossip to a quarrel is like wood on fire. Stop the gossip and the quarrel will end. Verse 21, very similar to 20. As charcoal to embers and as wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. You've barbecued before with charcoal. You know, as it starts to burn down, it turns white and ash, and it's not as hot. And so you add more charcoal to it if you haven't finished cooking things. And you squirt some lighter on it so it is, and it flames up like crazy and burns your eyelashes. No. You can tell I'm speaking out of experience here. But as charcoal to embers, it heats up. So is wood to a fire, it heats up. So is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife among people. Someone who is fueling misunderstanding, fueling antagonism among people. The quarreling man will create strife. Some people take pleasure in stirring up trouble by creating sides among people to an issue. Encouraging them to debate. It's a quarrelsome man. There's no resolve to it. He just likes a good fight. He likes to get rile up other people. And this image is pretty vivid to me. I'm a pretty avid camper, backpacker. A little bit slower about that these days. The ground and my body don't get along quite as well as they used to. Nor do my legs and back like the packing part. But I love being out in the woods, and love building a fire. I remember a trip with a group of young people once when someone thought a bigger fire would be better. It'd be a really cool idea. And almost started a forest fire when a nearby tree caught fire from the flame that went too high. It's just sometimes stoking a quarrel, disagreement between people, fueling that, can become a fire that's out of control. And I remember a barbecue not being hot enough and adding more charcoal to it. I made it so hot I burned the burgers. Gossip and stirring up strife can create problems that are destructive that you can't end. In verse 22, the words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to a man's innermost parts. Gossip, a bit of information that not very many people know, but I'm hearing it from the inside. I'm listening. It's just a gossip. It's just a juicy morsel that I want to hear, want to know. It's a gossip. To some people, it's like hot chocolate poured over coffee ice cream with a warm brownie underneath. It's just really attractive, and I want it to devour it. And they listen to the gossip, they take it in, they reflect on it, and make it bigger than what they heard. Does that not happen? Gossip's like that. And they spread it to others who do the same thing, and it only keeps growing. Gossip can be attractive and deceitful and deadly. So I'm looking at verse 23. Like a coating of glaze over earthenware are fervent lips with an evil heart. Have you ever encountered a fast-talking salesman? He promotes all the good things about his product, but doesn't tell you about the downsides. It's just only the good things. And he's deceitful in his manner, not telling the truth. Our illustration here, that would be the fervent lips with an evil heart. But the illustration here is about coating of glaze over earthenware, pottery, clay pottery. And you put a glaze over it, and it makes it pretty. It's colorful, it's got design. But the point of this is that unless you're using the glaze to cover up cracks in the pottery that will break with your first use. See, this is the illustration here, like a coating of glaze over earthenware that is faulty, earthenware that is faulty, that has a crack or is broken. Is deceitful. And fervent lips with an evil heart are the same thing. They are deceitful. People not speaking the truth. There's another thought came to me related to the pottery and the glaze, and it has to do with the English word we use, sincere. Someone who is sincere is a genuine expression of what is real, what is true, they're sincere in the heart. They're sincere. They mean what they say. They're trustworthy. And it's interesting that the word sincere comes from two Latin words, sin and sear. Sin is without, and sear is wax. So someone who is sincere is without wax. They don't, and the picture is back to the idea of glazing earthenware. You take a piece of pottery, and if it had a crack in it, they'd fill it with wax and then glaze over the top, and you wouldn't know that the pot you bought was faulty. See, so it was sincere. If it was without wax, it was trustworthy. It was a good piece. It was sincere. I said, so the point here is that glazing over things that are not true, saying things that are not true, is not sincere. If you're going to buy something, deal with a sincere salesman. 24, a malicious man disguises himself with his lips, but in his heart he harbors deceit. This proverb is very similar to the one before, concealing a lie with one's choice of words or manner of speaking. You're concealing. Some people are very charming and sounding sincere, but are very deceitful in their heart. Be discerning, be aware, just be conscious. I don't assume everybody is insincere. I don't assume that everybody's lying about something. We're taught in Corinthians 13 to believe all things. Trust a person. And if they prove not to be conscious, be aware of that, and understand that that happens in mankind. Just note in this verse that a person's heart is the source of kindness, of truth, of honesty, or deceit and hurt. And either one can come out of the human heart. Verse 25, though his speech is charming, do not believe him. For 7 admonitions filled his heart. Well, 7 destructive things will fill his heart. Just a statement concerning the Proverbs that preceded. And we're looking at 26 through 28 now, dealing again with the deceit. His malice may be concealed by deception, but his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. Even though someone comes with an evil intent, and he may be covering it up with a lie, being deceitful, in time, truth will prevail. Truth will be broadcast. Lived long enough to see that happen a whole lot of times in very public places and in private. In conversation, the truth of what happened in a given situation will surface in time. In the moment, you may think you've concealed it, you may think you've hidden it, you may think no one knows. But in time, people are going to know. But there's something that's really helpful, I think, to you in living your life is to know is that nothing is hidden from God. He sees everything we do. And even more than that, he knows everything we're thinking. The things we're thinking and don't do. The things we're thinking and wish we hadn't thought or could get rid of. He knows everything that's in our heart and mind and life, and he knows the intentions of our heart, it says in Hebrews 4. So there's no hiding before God. So live your life openly before him. And live in your life in a way that would honor him and that he'd be pleased with you and how you live it. The truth of every matter will eventually surface. Verse 27, if a man digs a pit, he will fall into it. If a man rolls a stone, it will roll back on him. That's pretty negative. But the point is related to deceit and a deceitful person. What a deceitful person plots against another will return against the plotter. That's the problem. Whatever evil you choose to do to somebody else will eventually come back and get you. Deceit will get what it deserves. It's another thought in the New Testament. Jesus expressed the thought, you reap what you sow. If you plant dandelions, I don't know if you'd want to do that. If you planted pansies, you'll get pansies, hopefully. But if you plant weeds, you'll get weeds, for sure. You reap what you sow. In verse 28, a lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. And in this parable, deceit and flattery are the same. Both are fueled by hate and envy. Both create hurt and ruin. And we just need to remember that the justice of God will avenge both. God will take care of what's wrong. It will not miss his sight, nor will it miss his response. With humility, speak the truth always, everywhere, and with everyone. So out of this chapter, I come down determined to speak the truth, pursue knowledge, understanding, wisdom, as we've learned from the other Proverbs. Respect others, be a servant to all. And I repeat that to you, speak the truth, pursue knowledge, understanding, wisdom, respect others, be a servant to all. You will be wise, responsible, industrious, and honest when you live your life before God. In the passage that you read this morning at the beginning, Ephesians 4:25-32 is a pretty good statement of here's the list of things to practice, things that to be aware of that relate to everything we've just talked about today. And I close with Colossians 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, Work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord and not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Father, thank you for granting us this text of wisdom to us, and warnings, awareness, not only of being conscious of the people we meet in our life and how we respond to them, but even being conscious about characteristics in us that are destructive to us, to others. I pray, Lord, that you grant us insight to ourselves in this. Help us to see. Help us to find the strength, the courage, the walk in your Spirit, that our life might reflect you, not the foolishness of men, the laziness of men, the deceit of men, who might be wise, might be responsible, might be honest. Help us, Lord. We commit this week to you, Jesus.